Well, in the case of Charles Manson, that raises all sorts of interesting questions, because I still think he was a Sirhan. I think he was wired up and run by the government, and that the whole Manson family operation was a government pseudo-gang. And that he is just as crazy as the proverbial bleep house rat, just like Sirhan. And he's sitting there in the can, you know, till the cows come home, thinking that he was Mr. Macho, and basically he was about as relevant as Sin Q from the SLA. He was just wired up and running. But that's a slightly jaundiced view of history. But of course, I did bring in tonight a book, dossier, the secret files they keep on you. The new book, the FBI War on Freedom of Expression, Alien Inc., which is, remember the columnist Kirkpatrick, who just did a piece and said that basically J. Edgar Hoover was an SOB at best? Well, it was based on this particular book because what they're doing is they're going through the FOIA requests on all the major authors, intellectuals, poets, artists. J. Edgar Hoover was even spying on Georgia O'Keeffe. Yeah, I mean, a really dangerous person. Well, the fact is that if you get the companion volume, Dangerous Dossiers, which is 1988 verse 1992, you will discover this book doesn't even know this one exists. And they cover exactly the same subject. Two-way FBI spying on the people of the United States, specifically the intelligentsia. And I, dig up all these different books, with, there's stuff on COINTELPRO, on American activities, the campaign against the underground press done by the PEN organization. And then there's a nice book about the U.S. government hit squads that were run by dear old J. Edgar Hoover and other fun folks you can find out about in this. And, the surveillance by Frank Donner, which is absolutely a definitive text, even though it is getting a few years old. And you go through this kind of analysis where you, get into the actual hit squads and studying the cases and so on and so forth. And at some point, it begins to slowly filter even into the most retarded hockey puck. The proper name for this particular society is not a democracy, because in a democracy, I wouldn't have people constantly saying to me, aren't you afraid someone's going to shoot you for what you're saying? Right, freedom of speech as long as you don't use it. Freedom of thought as long as you never let it out. Actually, the guy who coined that particular little observation was Mark Twain at the turn of the century, because he was running a thing called the Anti-Imperialist Coalition to oppose the U.S. imperial war against the Philippines. And he came to the conclusion that Americans were blessed with three precious things: freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and the prudence never to exercise either. There was another interesting piece today. Did you notice that a federal appeals court ruled last fall that it is not against the law to lie to Congress? Well, that is... Well, but that's why... Well, you remember...
Can we quote now? Will we do this?
Well, according to the Iran-Contra prosecutors, they agreed to drop 3 of the 10 charges against Claire George because his attorneys had argued that the 3 obstruction of Congress charges should be dismissed because, quote, a federal appeals court ruled last fall that it was not against the law to lie to Congress. Say again. Wait a minute. That means that if you get up there before a congressional Congressional Committee and say, I swear to tell the whole truth, you know, and nothing but the truth?
Except the Congress.
Well, but I didn't know it was possible for a court to decide that taking an oath was no longer an actionable offense. Has anybody here got enough legal training to explain to me how it would be possible for a court to vacate the legal effect of a oath to tell the truth? Can anybody explain this to me? I don't understand it.
Certainly. When you own the law, you can do anything you want with it.
We have entered then into Alice in Wonderland, where we have Tweedledee and Tweedledum, who can make words mean anything they want them to mean anytime they want them to mean it. Oh, we now live in a totally arbitrary universe where, in fact, nothing in fact is real other than what it issues from the Ministry of Truth, which is controlled by the inner party and run by the outer party, and they will rewrite history, reality, logic, semantics as needed to keep the proles satisfied, as long as we have our 2-minute hates.
Bullets are real.
Well, but now what you're suggesting is the possibility that we ought to, you know, to at some point go back and read the Declaration of Independence and recognize that the nature of the monarchy of George IV actually has very little difference from George III, excepting only that possibly George III was saner. You know, he was renowned for being a Fruit Loop. You know, I mean, it's just absolutely weird stuff going on that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you have articles, you know, on Keating co-defendants agree to settle, you know, and, you know, settle. But there's still $2 billion missing. You know, and I mean, then we had, what's his name, the guy who invented junk bonds?
Michael Milken.
Yeah, he is plea bargained, and they decided to let him keep $125 million net proceeds. Now, wait a minute, let's see. Given the fact that he's probably still got a computer in his 3-room cell, and a, you know, a fax and a modem and whatnot, that means that he's probably, by the time he gets out of prison, tanned, rested, and ready, he will actually, that $125 million will probably be back up to $1 billion again. And this is called Just Us. Just Us. I mean, it is just to the point where, you know, you start, you just kind of start going, and then you get a nice thing from the Christic Institute. Did everybody get the latest headline update, the 24th of March?
There's some copies up here for people.
Well, they said something very interesting in here at the end of the first page. They said, first, we need your help to stop the IRS from yanking our tax-exempt status. This latest nightmare began with a right-wing postcard campaign and engineered manipulation of public opinion. You know, and I was kind of struck by that because they keep saying about how they're being attacked from the right, and then I went back to Chip Berlay's Right Lose Left, in which he attacks them from the right. Because Chris, you know, rightist
Where is Chip Berlay anyway?
Well, that's an interesting question. But Chip Berlay is one of the major trashers of the Christic Institute. I mean, up to and including things like, you know, a number of undocumented conspiracy theories regarding the CIA and U.S. foreign policy have been widely circulated in progressive circles even before the Iran-Contra-Gate scandal hit the headlines. Some of these theories actually originated with the Larouchians, or or were first reported in the pages of Liberty Lobby's Spotlight newspaper. And then cut to the next paragraph, and it says, Christic no longer uses the term secret team, but for the first several years of the case, the Christic Institute used the term the secret team to describe the legal conspiracy they alleged in court. A copy of Prouty's book sat in Sheehan's personal bookshelf in his Christic office.
So what?
Well, now, that's this book right here that sits in my office, and therefore, my God, the Church of Perpetual Amnesia
You just lost
strikes
your tax
again.
status.
Boy, you better believe it. But when I hear the Christic Institute saying they're being attacked from the right, and then I read Chip Burleigh's attack on the Christic Institute, I start, how many people here remember the Oracle of Delphi?
Oh, yeah, that guy.
Lady. The Oracle of Delphi was a lady. Well, or at least a woman. But all of her predictions were very, very carefully phrased. They were phrased in such a way that they could be interpreted in diametrically opposed ways. Now, if you think about the right woos left, and you think about Chip Burleigh being part of the attack against Christic, which is an attack from the right, maybe this is Delphic. Maybe, in fact, it is Chip, who is the right, who is wooing the left. Now, if you think that that is absolutely as close to bonkers as you can possibly come up with, I have here a prepared lectures for 1992 from Chip Burleigh. My notes are the Rush scumbag of the pseudo-left. He's another Lyndon LaRouche. That's my charitable interpretation. Because he's talking about debunking conspiracy theories. Either be quiet or be loud, because I can hear both of us and we're kind of echoing. If it's good enough, go on.
Minor conspiracy.
Oh, okay. But he has here a prepared lecture for 1992, Debunking Conspiracy Theories. And I'm reading right off of his promo sheet. There was no secret team behind Iran-Contra. The octopus theory is all wet. George Bush's New World Order is not part of a clandestine para-government run by Yale's Skull and Bones Society. An appeal to reason and logic. Now we switch to the FBI right-wing spy networks, which was in the same packet. It's Political Rights Information Series number 5, distributed by the Movement Support Network of the Center for Constitutional Rights. And he's talking about the hunt for the Red Menace. And he has this wonderful expose of precisely what he told you didn't exist. To wit, the FBI has a long history of collaborating with right-wing groups to attack movements for peace and social justice, in much the same way as Oliver North relied on right-wing groups to to both raise funds for the Contras and serve as a public lightning rod to hide his own CIA-backed operation. In fact, some of the same players North orchestrated in the off-the-shelf private foreign policy drama were also involved in the off-the-shelf private domestic intelligence network, a network which conducts surveillance of progressive groups and then feeds the information to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and other public law enforcement and intelligence agencies. This loosely knit cooperative network passes information both formally and informally as part of an obsessive anti-subversive witch hunt based on a paranoid conspiratorial worldview. The network survives through different presidential administrations working inside and outside of government agencies and congressional committees and pursues its goals in the public and private sector with little regard for legislative or constitutional safeguards. It sees itself as composed of Latter-day Knights on a patriotic crusade and sees all dissidents as infidels.
But not a secret team.
And he said, debunking conspiracy theories. And now, he didn't mean for me to read those sequentially. Now, I mean, what am I? Alice in Wonderland? I mean, what kind of crapola is going on here? Here's the man who says there is no conspiracy except the conspiracy of the right to subvert and seduce the left. Other than that, there are no conspiracies. I mean, in fact, his right rules left is a conspiracy theory denouncing all conspiracy theories. That's a little bit like a Christian Scientist claiming that they can prove the material world doesn't exist based upon the evidence available in SANE. Well, wait a minute, you can't use the evidence of a system to deny the existence of the system in which you derive the evidence, right?
I think he's a very clever spotter.
Well, I am absolute. I mean, here's a little bit of material on the outfit, which.
Watching intellectual evolution in progress?
Pardon?
Are you watching intellectual evolution in progress?
Well, actually, what I'm watching is a replay of McCarthyism with a backspin. Now everybody's a fascist.
Yeah, I'd agree that it smacks of McCarthyism. I was curious as to whether anything new on the funding of Chip-Relay has come up, other than the anonymous sources that have read that.
Well, no, actually, I don't have anything more than I did at that point. I mean, there are the guarantors of Political Research Associate. The top 3 guarantors are anonymous. You know, what that means or who they might be or whatnot, at this point, it's impossible to know.
One thing further, I mean, he's referred to as a journalist. I'm not aware of any investigative recording you've ever done. And this brouhaha that he's sort of sponsored seems very divisive. It seems like interrupting the free flow of information rather than sponsoring it as you think a journalist would.
Well, my theory is that, the Hells Angels are the protectors of virginity, and Chip-Relay is a protector of free speech.
Well, Oglesby suggested in the interview on KBOO that at a time when he was counseling people and as an SDS representative, he was counseling against involvement in the Weather Underground at a time when Chip-Relay was an active member of the Weather Underground. And at that point, his career may have taken a turn.
Well, you got to remember that the Weather Underground was funded in large measure by the Brotherhood of Love, which was a California-based CIA drug operation. And it was the Brotherhood of Love who funded Timothy Leary's escape from prison. So a lot of Prison Underground was actually on the payroll of CIA, either knowingly or naively. And so, again, we still don't have all of our history dug out of the woodwork, because even at this time, with all of the lawsuits, Freedom of Information Act efforts, all of the different researchers that have been working on this now for years, we still probably do not have 50% of the facts dug out. For instance, you go to books like, oh heavens, let me think, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate by Marx. You will find in there that at a certain point he discovers indication of certain records, but they've all been deep-sixed, and he never gets the records. That you find all these tantalizing little leads to information which just go out there and disappear. The same thing with Acid Dreams. Acid Dreams has some really great titles of specific CIA documents, which, so far as anybody knows at this point, every one of those documents has been destroyed. Well, there's one particular title that talked about mind control with LSD, That's a charming title. I've always wanted to get my hands on the copy of the document to read it. Well, unfortunately, there aren't any available. So therefore, all these different investigative books usually come to the conclusion that, golly gee whiz, they really didn't do anything because there isn't any evidence that they did. And I say, wrong. In fact, the burden of proof, in the way I look at it at this point, the burden of proof is on the government to prove that they did not do X, Y, or Z, not the burden of proof upon myself to prove that they did. For the very simple reason, they're the ones who burn the records. They're the ones who destroy the evidence. They're the ones who murder the witnesses. They're the ones who intimidate, bribe, and buy off investigators and witnesses. Now, given the fact that that is their record, which, as I say, you can document up the kazoo in all these different books, to the extent that the books can go, each one of the people listed in here, incidentally, they give you the number of pages that the FBI refused to release. Seems to me the burden of proof is upon the government to prove they did not, in fact, set Sirhan up as a Manchurian candidate to serve as a decoy while the real assassin shot Kennedy from a maximum of this far behind his head. Kennedy's right mastoid bone was no further from the gun barrel than my finger is from this microphone when the bullet was fired. Now, Sirhan never got within 4 feet of Kennedy, and he was always in front of him. Therefore, and also according to the evidence that was finally turned over to the state archivist in Sacramento about a year ago, the LAPD destroyed something on the order of 600 photographic records of the pantry area, identifying bullet holes, and the number of holes in the pantry exceeded the capacity of Sirhan's gun by about 4 or 5 rounds.
The panels also.
Oh yeah, they destroyed the door frame, they destroyed the ceiling panels, they destroyed all the physical evidence, and they did that within 30 days of the assassination. So it seems to me that the burden of proof shouldn't be upon the investigator who's trying to unscramble this sort of Hieronymus Bosch rendition of history. It should be upon the government. And theoretically, that's not such a far-fetched notion because allegedly the government works for the people, not the other way around. And that the government has an obligation not only to be honest, but to seem honest. In fact, that is the ethics standard. You not only have to be ethical, you have to even look ethical. Which, of course, is why so many people in Washington are getting sweaty palms. Somebody just noticed that it's $25,000 per hour for George Bush to fly around. $25,000 per hour?
Use.
And the plane started at $50 million.
$72 million so far this year.
And they're harassing Sununu for $4,000.
No, they got it. He paid it.
He paid him back $4,000 because he went to see his dentist on a military plane. Had to be in touch with the president at all times. What do they do? Give you Novocaine? I don't know. I couldn't take Novocaine. I had to be in touch at all times. Nobody asked that question, did they? If you have to be alert and alive and functional, how come you get to go to a dentist? You know, I mean, when he's up to his elbows in your mouth, you know, and you got all the stuff, you know, and your whole face is numb and whatnot. I mean, so why do you have to travel on a military jet? Well, because if you are a complete, absolute latter-day Nero, it's fun, right? Anybody who would not enjoy a stretch limo and 3 hoods to guard you, with steely-eyed killer sunglasses, and Uzis under their coat, and earplugs, and radios. Wouldn't that kind of, give you a little bit of a high, too? And you're whisked through traffic. You don't have to stop for red lights. I mean, you're above traffic laws, and you just go,
Above all laws.
pardon?
Above all laws.
It's very difficult to believe yourself to be above some laws without getting confused, and believe you're above all laws. In fact, if you dig through a few of these books, everybody's know that the Philadelphia Inquirer is now in soft cover. Everybody notice the symbolism of the cover?
Yeah!
International distress signal. We're flying the flag upside down. Well, you dig into that, and you dig into America's 60 families and public plunder and the founding finaglers, and you get into all this, you discover that the purpose of government has been crime since the founding of the Second Republic. I mean, there has been no exception. It's been one unending, basic hog wallow, and the biggest hogs always, get the most. And if that's the kind of society you want, then you ought to love the one you have. Because the one you have, in fact, is the biggest bunch of hogs in any damn wallow that was ever invented. I mean, you can tell who gets the top in Congress, the executive, the judiciary. It's just like a great big cesspool. The biggest ones float to the top. I mean, no matter who's up at the top, you know what they are. It's never ambiguous, it's never uncertain, and the record is there. The evidence is there. So every so often there's a thing called a reform movement. Everybody gets all excited and they just go, "Oh my God, this is terrible! We've got to fix it!" They actually had a remember the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890? That was another great era of reform. I mean, we were going to fix it then. By golly, a mere 100 years ago. And they're talking about, all these different things that need to be reformed. Well, let me read you a little bit about the Interstate Commerce Act and a couple of these from the founding finaglers and other scoundrels, which is the real history of this country. While passage of the Interstate Commerce Act brought cheers from reformers, Nelson Aldrich knew better. He called it, quote, "a delusion and a sham, an empty menace to great interests, made to answer the clamor of the ignorant and the unreasoning." And it goes on, to meet a similar clamor for regulation of the trust that seemed to be blossoming everywhere, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. It declared illegal any business combination in restraint of trade or attempt to create a monopoly, and gave the power of enforcement to the federal courts. Like the Interstate Commerce Act, the business politicians regarded the antitrust law as a sop to the malcontents that was not to be seriously enforced. It eventually became an extremely effective weapon in the hands of business in its fight against labor organizations. As Mr. Dooley observed, what looks like a stone wall to a layman is a triumphal arch to a corporate lawyer. How many people ever heard of this book? The Founding Finaglers. They didn't learn about it from me. 12 hands go down. Well, public plunder by Locke. I just found that a matter of a few months ago. I mean, I'm still digging up books. I mean, I'm 52 years old, and I'm still finding out the books I should have read 30 years ago. I didn't read these books 30 years ago. I didn't even know they existed. I spend years collecting things like this. Now, this is getting to be a real collector's item. The campaign against the underground press. It is absolutely fascinating because it documents how the government destroyed the underground press in the 60s. I mean, it didn't just go away because it felt like it. They didn't get depressed and say, oh golly, I think we'll go hang ourselves or something. They were actively destroyed, up to and including assassination, firebombing, seizure of property. The FBI had a war against the Berkeley Bar for years, where they basically destroyed their funding base by intimidating advertisers, which is why the Berkeley Barb ended up with, its entire funding base was kinky personal ads, because they had basically had everybody scared off advertising with them. You can tell for sure that the Willamette Wheat does not qualify as the Berkeley Barb. And when you stop and think about how interesting it is that all of a sudden here we have the voice of the National Manufacturers Association, the Chamber of Commerce, the Fortune 500, on 50,000 watts, blasting you for 15 hours a week right here in River City. And he is now on approximately 500 stations across the United States. And I have not heard a peep out of this outfit called Political Research Associates, Unmasking the Political Right, a 10-year report. They don't even mention the National Manufacturers Association. They don't mention any part of the serious right. They talk about, oh my God, David Duke and Gripes. If hell, I don't know what they're going to do. Christic's almost bankrupt. Does everybody know that they've lost $1.2 million penalty that was assessed against them by Judge King? That's gone through the appeal process and it's been confirmed, and that the Supreme Court refused to review it, and that now General Singlaub, former chair of the World Anti-Communist League, is now in federal court demanding an additional $400,000 from the Christic Institute to pay for their legal expenses.
Yet another example of the powers not operating under the rule of law.
Well, but the thing is, if you listen to the trash-in on KBOO, you heard Chip Verlay and David Barsamian take the Christic Institute and kick it while it was down. It was all their fault. It had no mention anywhere by either of those two characters of the fact that Judge King was an appointee of both Bonzo's co-star, who had the legal standing of a tree rat, that in fact one member of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals was murdered before the Christic Appeal got there, and another member of the court had his window shot out of his limousine on the way to court. Possibly a chilling effect.
And those are completely unprecedented.
Never happened before.
Never, ever has anybody.
Oh no, they're destroying Christic. That's
No mention of the fact.
On the Christic Institute hotline, they were saying now that there's movements to retroactively revoke their tax-exempt status.
Retroactive?
So that they owe back,
that's unprecedented.
based on the fact that the sanctions were prevailed, that proves that they shouldn't have really have been tax-exempt.
Oh, so they're going to go back 2 years and jerk their tax exemption so that they can then go out at everybody who donated and took a tax deduction.
Well, I don't know if that will happen, but it may mean that certain district has to pay taxes on the money they receive.
Oh, well, but that would be like driving the stake through the heart. After you've done shot them, poisoned them, drowned them, and drawed them and quartered them. I mean, let's face it, I mean, that's going from the ridiculous to the sublime. The fact is that Christic Institute took on the real enemy. And by God, that real enemy won. Because according to Skolnick, Clinton's tied into BCCI through his wife, whose law firm received large payments from BCCI. And of course, George Bush is up to his eyeballs in both BCCI and BNL.
Mena, Arkansas is also a connection between the two.
Yeah, Mena, Arkansas, which was the Berry Seal Contra cocaine operation. For anybody who missed Berry Seal, he was the sort of the airborne edition of Rush Scumbag, another 300-pounder who liked to play fast and loose with the truth. He's the guy who tried to prove that the Sandinistas were really the principal cocaine smuggler in Latin America, for which he got one grainy picture of one guy who might have been a Sandinista, maybe in Nicaragua, but with the plane that ended up getting blown away with the pilot Buzz Sawyer and Eugene Hassenfuss on board. Anyway, old Berry Seal decided to become a DEA informant at a certain point, and shortly thereafter got turned into Swiss cheese with a machine gun, which you will now read infinite amount of duck speak saying it was done by the Medellin cartel. I find it highly doubtful that the Medellin cartel did a hit in New Orleans on a guy who probably got the same treatment as Camarena by the same outfit, which is the U.S. government. You know, it's an amazing thing when the CIA discovers that one of its operatives is running drugs, is then snuggled up to the DEA to cut a deal, they suddenly develop a very short life expectancy. But then you will read every, you know, so-called progressive publication that even talks about it, which most of them don't, will say, quack, 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 killed by the Medellin cartel, quack, quack, quack. There's not a shred of evidence that, in fact, that's who did the hit. And in fact, the best guess is it wasn't the Medellin cartel, but that's why you have to read anybody and everybody with a very critical eye. And just because something gets repeated, don't necessarily believe it.
Then they were killed by Scrooge McDuck?
I think that was accurately portrayed on an HBO movie starring Dennis Hopper.
How was that done? Because I missed that one.
Well, you got to hook up the cable and pay an exorbitant rate for that.
Out where I am, they don't got no cable. I'm out there in the pucky brush. I got to wait for another 6 months.
I only believe it was accurately portrayed. They might have.
Time to get a satellite.
It wasn't accurate, actually. I did.
Still don't get cable.
I watched this break.
I don't want.
Oh, okay. Well, they've got Dennis Hopper's balls too.
I want that cable.
Well, the fact is that BCCI, you know, there was a deal at the Justice Department, quote unquote Justice Department, because when there was a plea bargain, no trials, no prosecutions, no investigation, they just plea bargained it out. And golly, gee whiz, all these guys who were for that moment in time known as the bank, for what? What was it? Crooks and Criminals International, right? Got to get out of jail card, you know, they paid $500 million, which is probably 10% of what they stole. You know,
that's just the fine, they probably haven't paid yet.
no, actually, that's the nominal settlement, but your point is well taken, merely because it says in the media that a settlement was reached for which, you know, X amount of dollars will be, doesn't mean it really gets paid. so you could be absolutely right. I mean, that might just be what was said, what was agreed to, but it never really happens because actually Neil Bush, I think, agreed to pay something like $30 million in restitution. I understand at this point total collections by the Resolution Trust Corporation for, the nominal $1 trillion that were ripped off is now up to 60 million total of actual receipts. So who says crime doesn't pay?
Of course it
You're gonna
pays better than anything else.
Don't steal a dollar. If you go out as an honest thief with a gun and a mask and you steal $10, you can spend 10 years in prison. And take somebody like Rochelle McGee, he got life for literally stealing $10 at gunpoint. Now, if you're Neil Bush, you steal Silverado, and then, when you really get pushed to the wall and they're really going to make it hard on you, you too can sign a consent agreement promising that without admitting ever having done anything wrong, actually, there's no admission of guilt, but you promise not to do whatever it was you didn't do again. And they go, nutty, nutty! And, in the future, you will not be allowed to do what you didn't do, or don't admit to having done, again. And that's the American justice system.
Just us.
Yes, indeed, just us.
For them, not for us.
When did you say that?
Just for us.
The 21st of April, according to Skolnick, he's been talking to the people who are doing the program, and it's not being done out of Boston, it's being done out of a group in New York, which I believe is British television group. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it about BCCI? Is that?
According to what my information is, it's going to be about BCCI and a whole lot more. If you read the material that Skolnick faxed to me last night, it'll cover a lot of what's in there, i.e. George Bush's involvement with Saddam Hussein as a business partner, and the Chicago court cases, which if those ever go public, which right now there's a very serious effort to keep them under wraps, could cause serious heartburn in the White House.
Yeah, Bill Moyer's program on Tuesday night, the next couple of weeks, is going to be involved with the idea of, I think it's entitled Death of Democracy in America, and it's going to lean heavily on the Bartlett and Steele book, and should be really good.
Which book?
What went wrong? Bartlett and Steele's What Went Wrong with America thing? Yeah, that's on 10 o'clock.
Yeah, he's using these guys, the people in the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Yeah, 10 o'clock on Tuesday night, well, it's a couple of weeks.
And as I say, if they had included the war on drugs and the war against the Third World, they'd have covered the whole ballpark. They left the CIA and the Pentagon out. Because the war on drugs is a war against the internal Third World, and the war against the external Third World is just going hell-bent for election. It was 68 it's going to be seen in the future if there is one. 1968 is going to be on a level with 1066.
It was the end of politics, really.
It was 1968. Students were killed in the United States, Mexico, all over Latin America. There were revolutionary movements all over Latin America. Che Guevara, I'm trying to remember, was he killed in 68 or 67? 67. But the whole revolutionary movement of Latin America was still going. Regis Debray was a prisoner in Bolivia. In fact, if the Fidelistas had won in Bolivia, we would not have anything like what is happening now in terms of the quote-unquote narco-terrorism ad nauseum. the whole world was changed in '68. That was the Paris Spring.
Martin Luther King, too.
Martin Luther King was killed in April of '68.
In June, after both assassinations, King and Bobby, the Pentagon went totally into ape theory of management. Their justification system for tremendous over-expenditure systems, justifying boondoggles, the literature that they put forth to justify Pentagon boondoggles came out during the time America couldn't think because of the assassinations in '68.
Well, I can remember '68 as a year where it seems like it started out with vast promised potential all over the planet. I mean, there was the Prague Spring of Dubček, where maybe Czechoslovakia was going to have socialism with a human face. You know, I mean, there were all these possibilities. There were the Summer Olympics in Mexico.
Paris in May.
Yeah, you know, yeah, the Paris Spring.
World revolution.
Well, it was global. I mean, there were young, dedicated, honest, uncorrupted revolutionaries in Europe, in Africa, in the socialist bloc, in Latin America, in the United States. I mean, it was a worldwide phenomenon. And that scared the bejesus out of the elite, and the elite swore it was never going to happen again. And they've done everything necessary to ensure that it cannot happen again. And one of the fundamental necessities is to keep people divided against each other on the basis of totally irrational and absurd grounds. Let me give you the classic paradigm was the left versus the right. There are, you know, the Birchers, and then there's the progressives. Well, now we don't have any commies to kick around anymore. So we're going to have to come up with a new way of structuring the classic paradigm, because they have to keep the people in the same position as two the scorpions in a bottle. If the scorpions start saying, hey, you know, why are we fighting with each other? Let's get together and organize, get the hell out of the bottle. Well, as soon as the scorpions start getting organized and start getting out of the bottle, the elite has all these little bastards. They have people like the editor of the Progressive, who tells me on the phone that I am gullible because I call him and ask him for the facts on why he's attacking Marcley. And he doesn't have any facts. Therefore, I'm gullible. We have Chip Burley, who is running a yes, we have no conspiracies conspiracy. We have these hockey pucks all over the goddamn country who say, oh, cartel, oh my God, you know, and they react exactly the same way that the morons reacted 30 years ago about, the commie. You know, personally, I wouldn't know Cardo from a fence post. I get the spotlight because it actually carries people like Gene Wheaton, and the only place you can get Gene Wheaton is on Marlena's program on Friday morning on KBOO. Other than that, he's a non-person. The only place you can get an interview with Deborah Davis, who did the best investigation of the Washington Post, is either on Marlena's program or in the Spotlight. If you want to read material from the Napa Sentinel, from Harry Martin, you either get the Napa Sentinel or you find it in the Spotlight. You want to find out about what Sherman Skolnick is saying about BCCI, the only publication in the United States that will carry it is the Spotlight. Now, that doesn't mean that everything in the Spotlight is right. But not everything that's in CAIB is right. Not everything that's in Time is right, or Newsweek, or the New York Times, or any other damn place. You do not buy publications or read publications because they are printed by God, or by angels, or by immortals.
It also doesn't mean that just because you read them, you support everything that is
That's true, because I read Mein Kampf!
any more than because you're someone's attorney that you believe everything that that person stands for. But this guy that was just interviewing Mark Lane has no concept of the whole idea behind a counselor at law who's supposed to be a dispassionate advocate. I mean, he was completely, bereft of the whole concept of having counsel represent you. Counsel, I personally have an attorney who I really don't even like very much. But he's a good attorney.
And if he does a good job for you.
Right. I mean, we can hardly stand to be in the same room together, but, he's saved my ass a few times. He's done some things for me that have convinced me he's a competent legal counsel. And, when I need someone to advocate my legal needs, he's as good as anyone else, and he's cheaper. And so he's my attorney. We don't golf together. We probably are,
Well, sure as hell wouldn't come here.
No. He's a good attorney, and that's all that matters.
But again, you see, if you let people change the agenda and derail you, that's why I said, in the Church of Perpetual Amnesia, if you read the footnotes, in fact, I'll read it verbatim because I don't remember exactly how I put it, but it's exactly, I think, the fundamental truth. It says, Mark Lane, the only guy in the country who has succeeded in making the shit list of A, the CIA, B, the John Birch Society, and C, Chip Burley, all for the same reason. He tore the ass off the Warren Commission, JFK assassination conspiracy, E. Howard Hunt, and the CIA involvement in the murder. If anyone has a hard time figuring out why and how the shit lists are identical, I have some great oceanfront property for sale in New Mexico. You got to remember, when the CIA sits down at the mighty Wurlitzer, the tubes on the great Wurlitzer extend from the very far left to the very far right. But they're all part of the same damn CIA organ. And if you don't read everything from far left to far right with that fundamental fact in mind, you're going to be diddled. Because everybody prints something for some reason, and every leak, every piece of information usually comes for a reason. And I'm just, drooling over the prospect of a war within the ruling elite, where they're going to have all these different factions fighting each other. And you can see it right now in the fact that there are leaks against Israel and then counter leaks against the anti-Israelis, and you see them starting to sharpen their knives for the fight.
Carter visited President Bush the other morning and came out and said, "Oh, please support Clinton." I mean, Carter went in the White House, visited Bush, he came out and said, you guys need to get behind Clinton. That was just in the last week I heard that on.
Absolutely right, because Clinton is another Bush.
Here again, they've got a stacked deck they're dealing off of. They really don't care which way it goes in November.
Oh, no.
And
They've got it handled either way, I'm sure.
It's a moot point.
Well, there's...
It's the only option.
It will be, in spite of the media, it will be Clinton nominated by the Democratic Party. There's all this talk in the media that somehow maybe he doesn't have it sewed up. If anyone else thinks they're going to be the Democratic nominee, then I've got some oceanfront property to sell them.
No, they only want to make it appear that there's some kind of...
Well, let me read you...
Contest, but it's going to be one of the two, the evil of two lessers, and regardless of who comes out on top in November, the ruling elite will be...
Well, let me remind you that this ain't new, because there's a guy by the name of David Graham Phillips in a slashing piece of muckraking titled "The Treason of the Senate," described that body as, quote, "the eager, resourceful, indefatigable agent of interests as hostile to the American people as any invading army."
Wow. I think Bob Packwood exemplified that with his...
Oh, Packy Packwood, yes indeed. He is a man of the same stature as that just described. And the leader from Rhode Island was the aristocratic Nelson W. Aldrich, whose daughter married the son and heir of John D. Rockefeller.
Grandfather of Nelson or something?
Yes, indeed. The maternal grandfather and namesake of Vice President Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller. And Aldrich was named by Phillips as the chief servant of the money power in the Senate. As chairman of the Finance Committee and Republican leader, he manipulated the tariff and other fiscal policies for the benefit of the chosen few. So close were his ties to business that the chief textile lobbyist had a desk in Aldrich's office. In 30 years of service in the Senate, Aldrich had perfected the process of what came to be called, quote, invisible government, unquote. He had but to whisper his commands in the committee room of Capitol Hill to have his bidding done. Aldrich's ally was Senator Arthur Pugh Gorman, a Maryland Democrat. Together, they brought about a merger of the Democratic and Republican parties that successfully protected the interests of business, no matter which party was in power.
Just like today.
Yeah, well, that was written in 1911.
1911.
Boy, oh boy, we just keep going through the same old stuff.
I keep telling people we have the learning curve of a hockey puck.
I thought it was a flatworm.
Is that a promotion or a
A
demotion?
boiled frog, to revert to really classic metaphor. I mean, when do we ever get it figured out?